The British monarchy stands at its most dangerous crossroads in 3 centuries. What started as a simple demand on a motorway banner has transformed into the greatest constitutional crisis since the English Civil War. King Charles faces an impossible choice that will determine not just his legacy, but the very future of the crown itself. Just moments ago, new polling revealed numbers that should terrify Buckingham Palace. 68% of working-class Britons now support dissolving Parliament immediately. Even more shocking, 41% would back abolishing the monarchy entirely if Charles refuses to act. These aren't protest numbers. This is a revolution brewing in plain sight. If you want to understand how we reached this unprecedented moment and what happens next, make sure you subscribe, because this constitutional earthquake is reshaping Britain by the hour. Here's what the establishment doesn't want you to know. The movement calling for royal intervention has grown beyond anything political experts thought possible. What began with frustrated citizens demanding action has evolved into the largest grassroots constitutional campaign in modern British history. Over 3 million people have now signed petitions calling for Parliament's dissolution. Peaceful rallies in Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow and Cardiff have drawn crowds that dwarf anything seen during the Brexit campaigns. But the real power behind this movement isn't coming from traditional political activists. It's coming from ordinary families who feel completely abandoned by a system that no longer serves them. Teachers struggling with classroom violence, nurses working impossible hours, pensioners choosing between heating and eating, small business owners crushed by regulations they never voted for. These people aren't political extremists. They're the backbone of Britain, and they're united by one simple belief. Their elected representatives have betrayed them so completely that only the Crown can restore order. The numbers behind their anger tell a devastating story. Housing costs have risen 47% in 3 years, while wages stagnated. Youth unemployment in former industrial towns has reached levels not seen since the 1980s. NHS waiting lists have hit record highs, with some patients dying before receiving treatment. Crime rates in major cities continue climbing, while police response times get longer. Most damaging of all, public trust in Parliament has collapsed to just 14%, the lowest figure since polling began. When barely 1 in 7 citizens believes their representatives are working in their interests, the entire foundation of democratic governance starts crumbling. King Charles possesses constitutional powers that most people forgot existed. The royal prerogative grants him authority that hasn't been exercised in decades, but remains perfectly legal. He can dissolve Parliament. He can force new elections. He can bypass the entire political establishment if circumstances become extreme enough. Constitutional scholars confirm that while these powers fell into disuse, they were never formally abolished. The Fixed-Term Parliaments Act of 2011 attempted to transfer dissolution power to Parliament itself, but legal experts argue that in extraordinary circumstances, particularly when Parliament loses public confidence entirely, the royal prerogative could be legitimately revived. This legal ambiguity is exactly what makes the current situation so explosive. Charles wouldn't just be making a political decision. He'd be making a constitutional interpretation that could reshape British democracy forever. The pressure on Charles is coming from directions no monarch has ever faced before. Military veterans who swore oaths to the Crown, not Parliament, are organising unprecedented rallies supporting royal intervention. Over 25,000 former service members have signed declarations stating that their loyalty remains with the monarchy when Parliament fails the nation. Even trade unions, traditionally Republican in outlook, are fracturing over this issue. The Transport Workers' Union Executive Committee voted narrowly to support dissolution, with General Secretary Mike Lynch stating that Parliament has become completely disconnected from working families. The Police Federation, representing rank and file officers, released polling showing 63% of their members believe only royal intervention can restore order to Britain's streets. Religious leaders across denominations are wrestling with their consciences. While officially remaining neutral, several senior clergy have privately indicated that extraordinary circumstances might justify extraordinary measures. The Archbishop of York made headlines by suggesting that constitutional mechanisms exist for good reason and shouldn't be dismissed lightly during national crises. International observers are watching this unfold with mixture of fascination and horror. European Union officials privately express concern about British stability, with one senior Brussels diplomat describing the situation as unlike anything seen in a mature democracy. The uncertainty is already affecting financial markets, with the pound fluctuating wildly based on speculation about Charles's next move. But Commonwealth nations are paying closest attention, because Charles remains their head of state too. Canadian constitutional experts are studying the situation carefully, knowing that successful royal intervention in Britain could inspire similar calls in Ottawa. Australian politicians are split, with some quietly supporting Charles, while others warn about constitutional overreach that could destabilise democracy across the Commonwealth. The economic implications grow more serious daily. Beyond currency fluctuations, international investors are withdrawing billions from British assets, fearing political instability. Government bond yields have spiked to levels not seen since the brief Liz Truss crisis, making it more expensive for Britain to service its national debt. Yet some economists argue that constitutional reset through legitimate royal prerogative could actually stabilise markets more effectively than continued parliamentary paralysis. Oxford Economics released analysis suggesting that decisive action to break the current deadlock might restore investor confidence faster than allowing the crisis to fester indefinitely. Social media has become the primary battleground for this constitutional debate. Traditional media outlets remain largely critical of the dissolution movement, with BBC political editors describing it as dangerous populism and newspaper editorial boards warning about democratic backsliding. But digital platforms tell a completely different story. Independent content creators supporting royal intervention have collectively gained over 15 million followers in recent weeks. YouTube videos explaining royal prerogatives regularly outperform mainstream political coverage. TikTok accounts posting dissolution content have reached hundreds of millions of views, with younger voters surprisingly supportive of constitutional change. This digital divide reflects deeper fractures in British society. The metropolitan political class, media establishment, and traditional institutions remain aligned against dissolution. But ordinary citizens, particularly outside London and the South East, increasingly view royal intervention as their only hope for meaningful change. The geographical split is stark and revealing. London shows the lowest support for dissolution, reflecting the capital's connection to existing power structures. But across former industrial heartlands in the Midlands and North, support consistently exceeds 70%. In towns like Stoke-on-Trent, Blackpool and Sunderland, dissolution commands overwhelming majority support. This isn't just about politics anymore. It's about identity, belonging, and whether Britain's institutions still serve the people they're supposed to represent. Voters in these communities feel ignored by Westminster, dismissed by media elites, and failed by a system that promises much but delivers little. Age demographics reveal another fascinating pattern. Older voters, traditionally the monarchy's strongest supporters, are surprisingly divided. Many elderly Britons remember when the Crown provided stability during national crises, but they're torn between respecting constitutional tradition and supporting action against parliamentary betrayal. Younger voters, typically more Republican in sentiment, are rallying behind dissolution for different reasons. They see Parliament as captured by special interests and view royal intervention as a way to break the system open. Generation Z polling shows 58% support for dissolution, higher than any previous generation at that age. The business community remains officially opposed to dissolution, fearing market instability. The Confederation of British Industry warns about chaos and uncertainty disrupting economic recovery. But smaller business organisations are breaking ranks, with the Federation of Small Businesses releasing polling showing 74% of their members support early elections through any constitutional means necessary. Regional political leaders are adding complexity to the crisis. Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf called the dissolution movement deeply concerning for democracy, but his own approval ratings in Scotland have collapsed to just 26%. Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford took a more measured approach, acknowledging that constitutional conventions exist for extraordinary circumstances while urging calm deliberation. Behind closed doors at Buckingham Palace, the royal household is reportedly split between traditional courtiers urging caution and younger advisers arguing that neutrality in a crisis is itself a political stance. Sources suggest Charles is consulting constitutional experts from across the Commonwealth, seeking precedents and guidance for an unprecedented situation. The King faces pressures no British monarch has confronted in living memory. If he acts, he triggers the biggest constitutional crisis since the Civil War. The political establishment will brand him a dictator. International allies will question British stability. Media coverage will be brutal. If he refuses to act, he risks something potentially worse: complete irrelevance. Why maintain a monarchy that won't protect its people when they desperately need leadership? Recent polling shows this dilemma clearly, with 39% saying they'd support abolishing the monarchy entirely if Charles refuses to dissolve Parliament. Historical precedents offer little guidance because the situation is genuinely unprecedented. The last time a British monarch dissolved Parliament against government wishes was 1834, and that crisis lasted months, while fundamentally changing the relationship between Crown and Parliament. Charles's decision could have even more lasting consequences. The timeline is crucial. Parliament's current session runs until 2029, but political insiders suggest the government's position is becoming untenable regardless. Backbench rebellions are increasing. Cabinet unity is fracturing. Some MPs are openly discussing whether early elections are inevitable anyway. This is where Charles's decision becomes even more significant. If he waits too long, he risks looking reactive rather than decisive. If he acts too quickly, he appears reckless. The window for effective royal intervention may be narrowing rapidly as the crisis intensifies. Legal challenges are mounting on both sides. Constitutional lawyers supporting dissolution have filed preliminary papers arguing that Parliament's loss of public confidence triggers dormant royal prerogatives. Anti-dissolution groups are preparing counter-arguments that any royal intervention would violate modern constitutional principles. The Supreme Court may soon face the most important constitutional case in British legal history. Legal scholars are divided on whether the court even has jurisdiction over royal prerogatives, creating another layer of uncertainty in an already complex crisis. What makes this moment so dangerous is that there's no clear constitutional roadmap for what Charles should do. The monarchy survived for over 1,000 years by adapting to changing circumstances, but Charles faces a parliament that millions of his subjects view as completely illegitimate. Queen Victoria faced similar pressures during the Irish Home Rule crisis, but had a functioning political system to work with. Charles confronts a parliament that increasing numbers of Britons see as captured by special interests and disconnected from their daily struggles. The international implications cannot be overstated. If Charles dissolves Parliament, it would send shockwaves through every democracy on earth. Markets would panic. Allies would scramble to understand British stability. Enemies would see opportunity in the chaos. Yet doing nothing carries equal risks. A weakened, irrelevant monarchy serves no purpose. If Charles can't or won't act when his people desperately need leadership, then what role does the crown play in modern Britain? The pressure is now coming from the most unexpected source of all, the armed forces. While officially remaining neutral, senior military figures are making their positions increasingly clear. Major General Sir Richard Barron's recent statement that constitutional duty sometimes requires extraordinary action sent shockwaves through the establishment. This military dimension adds gravity that politicians cannot ignore. When veterans who served Queen and country start questioning Parliament's legitimacy, the implications go far beyond normal political discourse. These are people who risked their lives for Britain and swore oaths to the Crown, not Westminster. The religious community's response has been equally significant. While maintaining official neutrality, church leaders are clearly struggling with the moral implications of the crisis. When the Archbishop of Canterbury speaks about constitutional wisdom and service to the common good, everyone understands the subtext. Catholic Archbishop Malcolm McMahon's statement on BBC Radio that when democracy fails the people, other constitutional mechanisms must be considered, represents a remarkable intervention from religious leadership. These aren't political activists speaking. These are moral authorities wrestling with Britain's constitutional crisis. The economic data continues deteriorating daily. The pound has now dropped 8% since dissolution calls began trending. Government borrowing costs have reached levels that threaten fiscal stability. International credit rating agencies are reviewing Britain's sovereign debt rating, citing political uncertainty. But perhaps most significantly, foreign investment is flowing out of Britain at unprecedented rates. When international businesses lose confidence in a country's political stability, the economic consequences can last for generations. Charles must weigh whether short-term constitutional crisis might be preferable to long-term economic decline. The social implications are equally serious. Public trust in institutions is collapsing across the board. Police, judiciary, civil service, media, every pillar of British society is seeing its credibility questioned. When citizens lose faith in the system itself, the alternatives are rarely pleasant. This is why Charles's decision matters so much. He's not just choosing between constitutional options. He's deciding whether Britain's democratic institutions can be reformed from within, or whether they've become so corrupt that only external intervention can restore legitimacy. The clock is ticking louder each day. Every morning Charles delays his decision. Public pressure intensifies. The banner on that motorway was just the beginning. Now, millions of Britons are watching their king, waiting to see whether he serves the political establishment or the people who still believe in the crown. Sources close to Buckingham Palace report that Charles is deeply concerned about the situation and consulting constitutional experts around the clock. But concerns don't resolve constitutional crises. Only decisive action can do that. This moment will define Charles's entire reign. History will judge him not by his speeches, ceremonies, or charitable work, but by this single decision. Will he be remembered as the king who saved British democracy, or the monarch who watched it crumble through inaction? The stakes couldn't be higher. Britain faces its greatest constitutional crisis in centuries. The monarchy confronts its biggest test since the Civil War. Democracy itself hangs in the balance. Whatever Charles decides will reshape not just British politics, but constitutional monarchy worldwide. Other monarchs are watching nervously, knowing that his choice will affect their own legitimacy and role in democratic societies. The people have spoken with unprecedented clarity. The pressure is overwhelming. The choice is impossible but unavoidable. Charles must decide, and he must decide soon. The next chapter of British history is about to be written, and everything depends on what one man chooses to do with the most powerful constitutional authority in the democratic world. This is the most important political moment of our lifetime, and we're witnessing it unfold in real time. What do you think Charles should do? Should he exercise his constitutional authority to dissolve Parliament, or would that trigger a crisis worse than the current situation? Let me know in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because when the King makes his decision, you'll want to be among the first to know how this unprecedented constitutional drama ends.